everyone. It is time to head north. I'm your host, Natasha Ryan. I also happen to be the VP of Communications for the North Group. I have Steve Hernandez on today from the North Group and Michele Gay from Safe and Sound Schools. Michele, it is such an honor to have you back on the podcast. Your work is so inspirational. For those of you who don't know, Michele lost her daughter Josephine in Sandy Hook. And when I say she has made it her life's work to try to keep that kind of pain from happening to other parents, I mean it sincerely. And we have so much respect for what you do. If you want to just kind of add on a little bit about Safe and Sound and your background, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's good to be back. Good to, be part of the conversation again. It feels like it's been too long. But yeah, Safe and Sound is very much the legacy of my little girl. And it's not just my little girl. My co-founding partner, Alyssa, and I founded this organization together, and we honor her daughter, Emily, as well, in everything that we do. So it is, as you said, it's about making sure that this doesn't happen elsewhere. It doesn't need to happen. And there are so many things that we can do. Sometimes it feels like we get caught up in all sorts of rabbit holes and arguments. And the reality is that as we were beginning to experience that in our community, Alyssa and I both looked at each other and thought, okay, well, all that can keep going, but we have to get to work. And so that's very much what it's about, is just finding good people and pushing up our sleeves and making it happen so we can do better for our kids.
I love that. And Steve, of course, the North Group, everything we pride ourselves on is making the world a safer, better place. And that surrounds a lot of the time kids, because we all have kids, we love kids. And, Oxford happened in our backyard. And Steve, why don't you talk a little bit just about your background, but mainly why we're having why this conversation today is so personal for you?
Yeah, so Michele, I just got to say it's such an honor. I was doing some research on your guys' organization, and to see people that have been through it, living that fight, because it is a fight. It's a fight against it. We have a heart problem in America, right? Globally, I'll say. And someone asked me recently. I was speaking to a group on violence, and they said, "So what is the problem?" So we can go political, we can go guns, we can do all this, but it's a heart problem, right? It's a heart problem, especially when it comes to children. So a lot of my efforts and TNG's efforts and the team has been spent around, how do we look for different ways and different solutions to solve problems, whether it's intelligence training practices or situational awareness or security functions, and I watched some of your interviews, and you're spot on. I mean, you're spot on. We have people that have been in this industry for 20, 30 years that aren't saying the things you're saying. And it's just awesome to hear. So my hat goes off to you there. And one question I have is, and this has been something that's been on my mind. People say, well, why do you want to put all this capital and resources into this when there's a lot of companies doing school safety and active shooter mitigation? And I said to someone recently, I said, I can't understand. I hope I never have to look across that dinner table and where my son likes to sit, that seat's empty, right? Told you, Tosh, this one was going to be a hard one for me.
No, it's always hard.
It's so personal. There are babies and they're our future and the center and the heart of our communities. And, I think that's kind of what it comes down to, is that, it's worth all the hard work, all the frustration, all the, that's why, that's the answer to that question, is because it matters, because I have a child, because I'm an aunt, or, I'm a teacher and I love kids. They're worth it. They're the future. So absolutely, we got to run it down.
So,
sorry, go ahead, Steve.
Sorry. So when I say that, when I tell people I can't imagine what that's like, I mean, you've been through that. Mm-hmm. You've had to walk in your beautiful daughter's bedroom after this crisis and sit at the dinner table and pass the things that you do every day. And I think that if parents understand that, then there is no greater fight in the world than keeping our children safe, right? Because
Yeah, you're all in when you get it like that. I mean, it is unfortunately was made clear to me in a way that I would never wish upon anyone else, right? But I'm all in. We just keep throwing obstacles at me, and I will just keep tearing them down because it matters for our kiddos.
and that's unbelievably impressive. And if we could just, let's talk on that for a minute. I mean, because you lived this, the first 24, the first 48. Can you kind of talk on your process? How did you begin to process, and then when did you say, okay, I'm in, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life fighting? Because I can already tell you're a warrior, and you have a warrior's mindset in fighting this. So can you talk us through that? Because I think that's really important for people to hear, because you went from a grieving parent to a warrior mindset of I'm I'm going to compartmentalize, and I'm going to go to the school. I'm going to understand this. I'm going to get down to the cause, which I think a lot of people, right, wrong, or indifferent, I don't think it's wrong, run from what happened. And you faced it head on, and now are dedicating your life to it, to where you have to revisit it all the time. And the pain that you feel from that has to be just extraordinary and significant, but yet you're fighting this battle. So can you talk us through that process?
Yeah, I mean, I think first we have to acknowledge that we're all like the fabric of us all is unique, right? So sometimes I think we're tempted to compare how one person does it to how another person, moves forward and survives. And the reality is there's a lot to learn from a lot of survivors out there, a lot of warriors out there, a lot of people with great experience. But for me, I think some of the things that were unique to me, for one, my daughter, she really unwittingly prepared me for this biggest battle of my life. She's one of three. She's the baby, and something about the baby, they're like, they're fierce. They're in the middle
They
of
are.
they can just tear your house apart. That's my girl. So sure, like my stamina, my dedication, she was a challenge to my balance. She was a kid that came with a lot of a very profound special needs, as a child with autism and apraxia and a big personality, very, very, very in the middle of everything. So, her journey and walking along with her through this life and facing all those obstacles that she was facing kind of beside her, that really, built my muscles, for lack of a better, it was kind of like training in so many ways. We tackled a lot of things that were just, I don't know, I would have thought were impossible, but we did them together. The other thing is that I'm a person of faith, and that faith was the first thing I fell back on. I feel so blessed and lucky that I was given that. I was never like your model Christian. I'm still not. But to be able to trust and know that I wasn't going to walk this alone, and that my daughter was safer than I could ever make her here on this earth. Those are profoundly comforting ideals and visuals that supported me, and kind of just gave me the, okay, so now what? Like, I'm on the ground, I got nothing. I'm all yours. So what do you want me to do? That was literally the conversation I had with God, and this is where it brought me. So I don't know, but for just being real, it has been very important. It's like, there's no, I don't have time for pretense. I don't have, time to be sort of phony and keep a facade. I just don't
Right.
have time for that. So um, that that's kind of a little bit of a gift that comes from pain sometimes, is that you just learn, okay, now it's time to be real and just face this head on, as you said, Steve.
Yeah.
Michelle, I admire that you're able to put your head down and go to work, right? And have faith in God. We often say, unless something personally affects us, we don't get involved. And here we are. We probably spoke on camera a year ago.
Yeah.
We've seen many more mass shootings. How do we get people to understand and get involved if they haven't been personally affected?
I think a lot of how we talk about this stuff and explain things to people makes a difference. I know for the experiences that I have with people, if you're talking about something that is just so far out of their realm of comprehending or imagining, naturally they're gonna tune you out. Or if they don't have the skills to be able to cope with those things, they're of course going to recoil from them, and they're going to turn their attention to something else that feels more comfortable or familiar. So I think a lot of what we do is about making it accessible to people. It's actually not rocket science. It seems like when you look at these problems, as I did, 10 years ago, and I thought, geez, how are we still here? I in the course of my career as an educator, we had more than enough horrific loss and tragedy in schools. Like,
Mhm.
is it still happening? How come we haven't, cracked the code here? And then you start to dig into it and you realize it's because it's not like the invention of antibiotics that we can take some pill and then, we can be cured of the infection. It's actually so much more multi-layered, and that might seem overwhelming at first, but then you realize that we all have a part in it. And if everybody just tackled one layer or brought to the problem what they could offer, then we as a community, as a whole, as a nation, can actually start making a difference. And I think that's where it's all about. We all play a part. You don't, as one person, have to be the one who solves it, but you do have a part to play in it. And that, I think, is where we've seen success, helping people understand, okay, I'm not going to be the one who invents the antibiotic, but I will be able to play my part and look out for someone who's hurting, foster relationships with community mental health, with police, with community resources, with school, and we can play as a team and win at this.
Steve?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's like I said early on, we have a heart issue.
Mhm.
I understand bad people hurting bad people. I understand bad people hurting good people from a survivor mentality. I even understand good people hurting good people. I don't understand anyone hurting someone who can't defend themselves, in any way, right? And I've had to put myself mentally in a lot of criminals' minds and
Yeah.
figure out what makes them tick, right? And in the intelligence world, we call it mice, which is motive. It's based on motives, right? Money, ideology, coercion, and ego. And it's why people do things the way they do, and ideology is a big one, right? And it's conditioned through a lot of different ways. I think educating is really, really important. I think teaching people a mass consumption of situational awareness, and what does that mean, right? Because it's a big word. You've got the word situational, and then you've got the word awareness. And when you put that into a training curriculum, what does that look like? When you expect people to be sensors in the environment that they're operating, whether it's educators, facility staff. We'll just stay on schools for a second, because the workplace violence thing is a big issue as well. And I
Mhm.
think it's more defendable against than school violence, because I think we're dealing with a lot of status quo, a lot of this is how we've always done it. This is what the budget is. I don't think there should be a conversation around budget when it comes to schools. I don't. I think if we're willing to spend tax dollars on many other exorbitant things that don't really have
100%.
value.
Yes.
Yeah, I
I
agree.
think so extrapolate budget from school safety for a second, right? I think we take that out of the conversation immediately and we don't ever talk about it again. And the bill is the bill and the taxpayer figures it out and the government gets behind that and the states get behind that. I think the next thing is what we call in our world is risk management. So now there's a continuation of assessments being done, and we've done thousands of school assessments as a company, and I can tell you that in our people, and I mean that collectively with some of our staff, they've just before us they were doing them since 2004 2003, and what I've found is it's like putting an article that you just wrote in Grammarly, right? And then rewriting it and then putting it in again. You're going to find something after you reread that article 3 or 4 times. Security is no different.
Yep.
Right. Third party validation is key. I think we need to have a very, very good conversation. And it's not from a sales standpoint. There should be tax dollars that pay for this, that it should be and I don't think anybody would be upset about giving, $5, $10, $100 a year on their tax bill to this. And I think when you start looking at a large federal or state fund, and I've talked to different, and I know there's money out there for cameras, access control, but I'm going beyond that because I personally don't believe a well-armed adversary will figure out a way in based on structural and physical security standards. And I'm sorry, but all the standards we talk about, produce, and mandate are publicly available online. So as somebody that's studied adversarial behavior and how bad guys think, right? If a young teenager wants to go to his high school and start creating carnage and wants to initiate that kill chain, they're going to find a way to do it, whether it's with a firearm, a vehicle, a knife, a bat, whatever. The differentiator is going to be who is there to stop them and how prepared is the environment that in my opinion, right? And I had this epiphany early on that, we just need to teach everybody how to be tactical and teach law enforcement. But it was Oxford really changed my thought process with that, because I realized, wait a minute, this happened to one of the best trained sheriff's departments in the world. Sheriff Michael Bouchard spends a lot of money on ammunition, training, overtime make sure his officers, they shoot once a month. I don't know many agencies that do that. They practice, they do dynamic exercises, they train their SWAT team, they train their SROs. But I realized after Oxford that why are we so focused on law enforcement? Why aren't we focused on the days, the weeks, the months ahead when this person starts to go from radical or starts to go from I'm okay to I'm radical to I'm operational.
Yep.
And then those differentiators between that, and to me, that's what I'm just unbelievably passionate about. How do we figure that? So this is part psychology, behavioral science, behavioral threat indicators, and then security, physical security, awareness, training. I think we've been very good at, we need cameras, we need guys, gates, guns, guards, as we call it in the security business. But wait a minute, we still have a teacher that doesn't even understand what a firearm looks like, that doesn't understand the indicators behind that student drawing the pictures that they're drawing, or the girlfriend that doesn't understand, my boyfriend made a statement and then posted something online about how he's really tired of being bullied and he's going to do something about it.
And that's what I mean too, Steve, about it, that we can win at keeping our kids safe if we're playing as a team, right? So yeah, making sure that the environment is as safe and secure and equipped as possible, and that responding agencies are ready, they're prepared. But more than half of the equation is the people in the building, the kids, the teachers, the custodians, the secretaries, the parents, and on, right? So we need, I think that is where we are right now, is how do we engage, kind of back to your question, Natasha, how do we engage people in this so that we don't keep getting that, head in the sand thing. Sure, people like Steve are driven and passionate, and they're going to keep doing what they do, and they're going to be a great asset to us in this war. But what about the rest of the treasures, of the assets that we have, the eyes and the ears that our kids and our teachers are, our community-based mental health. Just even, there's been tremendous work in Michigan and in your neck of the woods in terms of making sure that school communities have appropriate behavioral threat assessment programs in place. That's something in my day when I was a teacher, I didn't know what that was. That was something that the police do, and like that was not something on our radar at all. And yet now I think the tide is slowly beginning to turn, because people are realizing, well, wait a minute, I am part of this. And it is my responsibility to look out for my community, for my kids, for my colleagues, and keep this place safe.
So you are seeing a more open table, if you will, from school districts across the country. Is that what I'm hearing? You're seeing the progression.
Yeah, I absolutely am. And the 10 years that we've been at this, I stumbled onto behavioral threat assessment, that process, for example, since we're on that, early on. And I thought, gosh, how are we going to get, this is, again, not rocket science, like security and those types of procedures and practices. That's not rocket science either. And we're still having a hard time getting people to, lock their doors, during times when we need to protect our kids and teachers. But here we are with this, and this is like really next level, really helping people understand there's a long trajectory before somebody ever gets, as you said, operational, where somebody is, has made their plan and they're ready to commit an act of violence. We have a lot of opportunities, and really just, facing head on the past and the pathway to violence that our attacker took at Sandy Hook opened my eyes to the fact that there were multiple points along this young man's life, where we could have turned him another way, where there were opportunities to intervene and to do things differently, for the sake of that individual, those around, that individual, but also just, from a protective standpoint. If we know that there is someone who's a little bit unstable in our community, well, then there are things we can do to try to balance safety a little bit better and employ some more protective strategies, as well as, intervening to try to right that person, in the middle of that challenge that they're facing.
Well, and I think that, when we were going down this road of kind of the pathway to violence, if you will, we started researching some crazy statistics, and what we were finding was abnormal, and I would have never expected. And one of them was, I'm going to read from here, but 93% of attacks were planned in advance. Mm-hmm. And when I heard that, I'm like, that's crazy. And another one was 93% of attackers engaged in behavior prior to the attack that caused others to be concerned.
Yep.
Well, who's others? I'd like, if I'm an investigator, right, I'd like to know who they are. Because I think there's two things that go to that, right, is fear to report or lack of knowledge in why to report. So I think we can address nationally the lack of knowledge piece.
100%.
And I think through legislation, we can address the fear, because if you don't and you knew, then to me, you're an accomplice at the end of the day.
100%. Yeah. I mean, really educating people and identifying for them their resources, right? So reporting is one thing, and it's a very important thing. But if you're reporting into kind of an echo chamber or a vacuum, or that person who's receiving that report doesn't quite know what to do with it because they're not plugged into the resources, and we're not really getting anywhere. We're kind of spinning our wheels. So I think we really need to think through the whole process when, when others are concerned. I like that. Who are others? I want to know these others. But when others are concerned, let's not just give them one mechanism for speaking up to raise the flag and say, hey, help needed over here. Let's give them multiple, because we don't know for sure that one single chain of events will follow through to completion. We want to make sure that there are multiple places and avenues that our others can reach out for those resources and those supports.
Well, and it was interesting because one of the other things with that was, you talk about support. 61% of attackers were motivated by a desire for revenge, and 34% of attackers were motivated by attempts to solve a problem. So there's this, like you said, this trajectory that occurs long prior to the event, or the kill chain, as we like to call it in law enforcement, being initiated. So where is that? Because I think that things like significant personal loss or humiliation, right? That's evident in our potential warning signs list, right? We know from a behavioral threat management standpoint that, okay, this person just lost a mother, father, aunt, uncle, dog, whatever. They're dealing with something. So how, in your experience after 10 years of doing this, how do you approach that?
Again, I think it's a whole of community approach that's going to be our difference maker, because every community is different. Some are far better resourced, and some have an unprecedented scarcity of support resources. But if we can at least educate communities to be part of recognizing, this person is hurting. If somebody is hurting because they lost a parent or a best friend, or we should be supporting, period. We should be doing the right thing by that person, period. And in just doing the right thing and stepping up for people, we might be staving off some of those hurts that fester, that become grievances, that become, all sorts of things, that become, wounds that become plans, and, desires for vengeance, and, this perception of injustice, and all of those things that we see in the 93%, that you're talking about, all of those cases. There is this common, whether it's justified or not in our eyes, it's their experience. And when someone is hurting or someone is confused, it is our responsibility to try to step in and provide some support.
Well, I heard a quote the other day, and it struck me regarding this about community, and it was something to the effect, and I had it somewhere on my desk. I wrote it down. Somebody said it, and I was like, that is brilliant. It takes a village to raise a child. And if the child does not feel the warmth of that village, they will burn it down to feel warm. And I was like, whoa.
Right. I mean, that's what we're seeing. We're experiencing as a society and communities all across the country and the world now. That's what we're seeing.
And I think that, we all find ourselves, work-life balance, right? When, my little boy Rowan runs up and daddy, excuse me, daddy. That's his new thing, is excuse me. Everything.
Polite. He's a polite interrupter.
But it doesn't stop. Like, I have to acknowledge or excuse me gets into, a fist fight with him just hitting my side. And the other day I realized, nothing is more important than when he's saying excuse me, because he needs me. And I tell you, I tend to take these situations, when I study them, or we're involved in, or we're responding to a workplace or something with kids, even the human trafficking stuff, the counter human trafficking stuff that we do. And I correlate it back to my own children. I think it's fear. But I realized I was doing something really important. I had a customer deadline for a security proposal, and I just stopped. And I just said, you know what? I don't know what I'm missing right now, but whatever it is, may curb something down the road. And I think that that's part of the conversation too, because, we talk about community, we talk about the village, raising the child. It is important, and I think that that just hit a nerve with me, because I don't think we're tying that too much into this conversation in the way where and we have a saying in the military, and you'll love it. It was every soldier is a sensor, meaning everyone on the battlefield that was seeing something that becomes data. And how do we communicate that, right? Same in law enforcement. Every officer is a sensor on the street, especially in a big city. I think every teacher, every administrator, every student is a sensor in a school. How do we build that concept out to, one, it's safe to have this conversation. My son told me the other day, they are not, my 12-year-old, they are not learning about war in a factual, kind of setting about war, because it's violent. So they don't learn about the Battle of the Bulge. They don't learn about, certain conflicts that have happened, because it's ego. Because we watch documentaries and stuff all the time, and he's like, Dad, they won't even teach us about that, because they don't want to have the conversation about what happened, to 6 million people during World War II. And I'm like, well, buddy, that's a pretty bold statement. How do you know? And then I actually talked to a teacher. And they're like, yeah, we kind of teach on this because we don't want. I think part of it is we're not having community conversations with our children that are real. I will tell you that my son knows everything about what an active shooter is going to look like. And partly that is he's grown up around it, right?
Steve has two sons, by the way, just so you know.
Yeah, the 5-year-old, not so much, but the 12-year-old, he's been there. He went to an active shooter training back in December with me for a police department. And I really believe that and I don't expect everybody, I don't expect everybody's kids to go to jiu-jitsu or Krav Maga or know how to fire a firearm and know how to defend I don't expect that, because quite frankly, I don't expect a lot of adults to be responsible for that either. But why is it not okay for kids to come and tell us as administrators, parents, hey, so-and-so said this online? In fact, seeing these kids on Snapchat and some of these other things, I would have never talked to another kid the way some of these kids do. So how do we address that? Because I'm sure that I saw on your website, you guys address bullying, because it's a pre-incident indicator.
It is 100%. Yeah. And again, it's something we can intervene, to prevent, to stop, to right. Those are all those misbehaviors are those red flags. Those are those things like the sensor should be going off. Something's not right. We need to course adjust. We need to provide some support. We need to provide some intervention. All of those things are those kind of, points along the way. There are opportunities. And addressing those things, we can flip the whole scenario. And it is not necessarily likely that someone who's experiencing bullying or someone who's perpetrating bullying is, that's going to result in something like what we experienced at Sandy Hook. It's a possibility. We know this, but it will lead to long-term consequences, long-term pain, long-term suffering. We can't have that in our.
Can we talk about that? Can we, what do you think those, because I think that's a really important segue. What do you think those long-term effects are?
Depression, anxiety, isolation, withdrawal, all of these things are very, very unhealthy for the individual. They're unhealthy for the community. We need every member of our community. You just said it takes a village. We need every single person engaged, doing what they were put on this earth to do, what makes their heart sing, whatever it is that they can contribute to our community, our families, the kind of micro communities that we have in the form of workplaces and schools and so on and so forth. But I want to go back to something you were talking about with, not expecting everybody to be that warrior, to be that, because it is exceptional, let's face it, for a 12-year-old, like your 12-year-old son, to have that kind of knowledge, but there are kids that for whom that is empowering, and that they're able and capable, and with the proper support of parents and their families and the right form of education for them, they, they can go down that path, and they maybe one day become heroes in our community in the form of law enforcement or military or EMT, or who knows, right? But by and large, for most kids, it's just about the basics. It's about, knowing when something feels safe or unsafe. It doesn't feel right. I'm not sure what to do with this, but like my spidey sense is kicking in. So what am I going to do about it? Or even just in terms of situational awareness, like that alone is an incredibly empowering concept to give to our kids and our teachers and our community members. And sadly, we're like moving farther and farther away from that. Like, how many videos have you seen where someone's like on the phone and they fall into like a manhole or a fountain or something like that, right? So we've got to kind of get people back to like the real world, and that we have to be giving them honest experiences, teaching the basics about know what's around you. How many different ways could you get to safety? Where could you go if it wasn't safe? Who could help you? What would you even say if you were going to call 911? That's great that we teach all of our kids 911. It's amazing how young they are and they can still call 911. But now, what do they say? How do they communicate? What's the language? What are the words? So kind of dialing it back for people. But I have to say, I'm struck by what you were sharing, what your son was sharing about not really being given the context, if you will, of like what something like war is. If we're depriving our kids of understanding of violence, then it seems to me that perhaps is why we're seeing some of these aberrant behaviors on social media or this bullying, or because they're not necessarily connecting that those are kind of baby steps in the wrong direction, right? And not understanding the facts of history is a very, very dangerous thing. That's something that could lead us, unfortunately, as we know, to repeat that history.
Well, I would totally agree, and I tell people all the time, I too got saved by a good God, and I can tell you that I tell people I'm a violent Christian. Hurt good people, and you'll see what I've spent a lifetime preparing to do. Hardest thing for me is I know I can't be everywhere, and so I've conditioned both boys. Even early on, I mean, I sometimes play a game that I played with my oldest, with my youngest, which is eyes and ears. When we're out somewhere, what do you see? What do you hear? Those two senses, right?
And you don't have to be a warrior. We all have different DNA. Like we all,
That's right.
But you do have eyes and ears, and when something doesn't feel right. So what would you do?
Who's carrying a firearm in here? I mean, I do that with my 12-year-old all the time. Where would a firearm be most practical in this restaurant right now? Who in here looks like they'd be an off-duty police officer? Who in here looks like they might be kind of a rougher individual? And then also teaching grace with that, right? Because my concept has always been, and again, this isn't for everyone, if I think you're a threat, I want to get as close to you as possible. Meaning, hey, how are you today? Can I help you? Because once I'm here and I've got my hands and we're talking, we're having that conversation, now I'm in control. And a lot of times, I've been in many situations doing the executive protection stuff and what have you over the years, where I have a protectee, and this person's very interested in my person. Now I've got to figure that out. And so I've conditioned the boys to be the same way. And what's interesting to me is I talk to other parents, even other parents of who are in law enforcement or what have you. And they're like, oh, my kids are just, they don't even really know what I do. I don't really talk, because, they want to keep them away from it. And I think that, one of the things that stuck out to me on the over 10 million data points we've collected on acts of violence, because we have a massive spreadsheet of all these different acts that we've studied and what people did beforehand the days, hours, weeks, where they went. They went to 7-Eleven, got a big gulp. Why? What did they do at 7-Eleven? Because there's a lot of investigative notes to a lot of these data points. And what I've seen is there were multiple iterations with a lot of these active aggressors where they wanted somebody to stop them. And yet no one either had, I don't want to say the courage, because I think that's aggressive, but I think it had the ability or the understanding. I think that there's also many instances where those folks were stopped by law enforcement on the way to commit an act. And, you know, Stephen Paddock, 2017, Las Vegas. I mean, how in the world can someone with one of the best trained cities in the world when it comes to situational awareness and acts of violence and mitigation be with the best CCTV system in the country, be unaware? And I think that it's what we call complacency, right? People get complacent. It happens in combat. So
I think a lot of it is that look away, like, oh, that feels uncomfortable, I'm going to look away, you know, that conditioning that we have as a society. And I think that's where we miss out on the engagement of the larger community. Cause like, I'm not the one that is going to kick down the door, but I might notice something. And instead of turning away, if I look a little longer, I might get information that I can then pass on that can be used.
How do you process that?
So I think that's where we are. That's what's so challenging about engaging ordinary folks like Natasha and me, you know, in this process, is they don't necessarily have the recourse. They don't have the neural pathways. Like, you've been trained, you're talking to your young children and kind of creating those neural pathways and those thought processes. But for many people, like and they're kind of uncomfortable because they know, I probably should do something. I probably should say something. I'm not really sure what I'm seeing. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do about it. I'm not sure how do I even articulate this and where do I go with it? So I think if we can back the bus up and help people to process that and just go, okay, wait a minute, something really doesn't feel right. And it doesn't seem logical, but I'm going to go with that. I'm going to sit with that uncomfortable feeling for a little bit. I'm going to think about it and I'm going to take it somewhere, you know? So we really do have to teach people, what is their recourse? What is, you know, what are the words? What's the process? How do I do this? Because when you do, like, look at tip lines, right? Over the past, you know, several decades, look at the success of tip lines because we created a pathway for people to insert information, to input information. And one thing, you can say what you want to say about social and all of that and where we are right now, but people are very willing to speak up if you teach them how, teach them where, give them the steps, give them the language.
And that starts young. So I think this starts, I'm going to even take it a step further back. So I think this starts especially with little girls. Both of my children at some point have been told, don't get in the drama, don't get involved. And I take the exact opposite approach. I'm like, were you using your voice to speak up for someone that wasn't using theirs? Yes, mommy, I've got your back. I'm not going to teach my kids to be polite and proper and keep their mouth shut and be a good little girl. That is not what we need to keep messaging to our children, especially little girls. Use your voice. If you see someone being treated poorly, you absolutely get involved. That's how I am. That's how I'm raising my kids to be. I'm not standing by. I'm not going to be quiet. And if that makes your teacher's job harder at the end of the day, then it does. And I'm sorry, but you did the right thing. Now, that doesn't mean you get to cause drama. Don't get me wrong. But if you are using your voice on behalf of someone that can't in an uncomfortable situation, well done.
Exactly.
I think the narrative has to change from very early on, especially around little girls.
Yeah, 100%, especially with girls, and I just biologically, our girls are even a bit more observant than our little boys, right? So let's harness that. Let's harness that.
We go in a parking lot now and she'll say, Mom, creeper, over there, I don't like the vibe. I don't like that guy. And I'm like, okay, thanks. Let me get a look. You know who I'm talking about.
Right. Good for her.
Uh, yeah. And part of it is working for a security company that puts so much value on situational awareness. It has opened my eyes. I was already cognizant because being a news anchor, you see the worst case scenario play out every time. So I
Yeah.
was cognizant of it could happen to anyone, anywhere. So I've never had that head in the sand mentality. But
Yeah.
now having worked at TNG and being situational awareness just driven home on a daily basis, now I know you don't, like it starts very basic. When we go into the parking lot, look around. Don't go by the kidnapper van. You know what I mean?
I
Like,
know, right?
like that.
100%. Did you ever read, I think we might have talked about this, Natasha. Did you ever read The Gift of Fear by Gavin
Yes.
DeBecker?
Yeah.
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 I mean, I think for a lot of people, I always say to people, like, they're like, threat assessment. What does it sound so complicated? It sounds like, just read The Gift of Fear. Like, really, you don't have to be a threat assessment expert, a psychologist, a forensics, psychiatrist, what a psychologist, that you don't have to be an expert to that level, but you do have to be able to recognize that feeling in your gut, that creeper, sort of like alarm bell that's going off when you're around someone. You do not need to unpack it right then and there. You just need to get away. You just need to take the basic steps, but you do need to honor your instincts. And I think especially with girls, but with many of our kids, we are teaching them away from their instincts because we're trying to, just like keep the peace, like keep moving. Everybody keep quiet.
Yep.
So it's funny because you both ladies, you're touching on something that I'm trying to scream on a mountaintop daily, right? I don't expect everybody to be a highly trained, skilled, John Wick in the room. I don't. But here's the thing. For me, it's always been pre-incident indicators, right? What are they? And then get into people do things because they have placement and access to do them. And then the other side of this is, when you start to look at an aggressor, and we use a process corporately, and you may have heard of it, but it's very simple. It's risk equals threats times vulnerabilities divided by countermeasures times impacts. I want to understand what a risk looks like, whether it's in it. We do it when we assess schools. I need to know what the threats are to that school,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then I need to list those out, and then I need to know what the vulnerabilities are. And a vulnerability is it could be physical, it could be something that is lended from a natural disaster, an effect, and then what countermeasures do I have, right? And how do I quantify those, and what are they, and how are they broken by a threat, and then go from that to the impacts. Here are my impacts based on the three variables of my my threats, vulnerabilities, and my countermeasures. And then once I list that out, now I can come to a quantitative understanding of what my risks are.
Mm-hmm.
The other side of this is going to be, for me, when wrong looks wrong, report it. I mean, there's many county sheriff's deputies and police officers that are sitting somewhere, wanting a call for service to come in, wanting to go and investigate something. I think all too often we tend to drive past potential chaos because either we're untrained, but you said it earlier, it's this avoidance factor, right? It's mental avoidance, it's
Mm-hmm.
fear. And Gavin DeBecker does a great job in The Gift of Fear approaching this issue, because fear is a gift, but being able to control your fear and your reaction to it
And
and
use
use
it. Yeah, it's your red flag. It's your, oh yeah, I don't like that feeling, but that's the red flag. That is literally my God-given gift that, something's not right and I need to take action.
It's discernment. It's
Right.
discernment. And I'll tell you, my wife has some of the best discernment when it comes to people and places. I mean, she'll just be like, I got to check in my spirit. We should go. And I'm like, we're not leaving. I'm staying, but she's like, we got the kids, we need to leave. I mean, and it's been kind of one of those things for me where I don't think you can teach discernment. I think that's a gift, but you can teach recognition.
Yeah.
And I think there's a big difference between discernment, judgment. I feel this because I have a connection where it's a God-given gift to be able to discern, what we call facts for increased threat ratios. If you're somebody that just runs around and like, that's wrong, that's wrong. But now if you're trained in recognition, which is absolutely, I mean, somebody can become a behavioral threat expert from Google. I'm just going to just throw it out there for
Yeah,
people listening.
yeah, it's not rocket science, right? So
No,
if you're a good reader, these are not big concepts. So,
no.
you really can, follow the research and learn from the case studies and, gain a significant amount of knowledge there for sure.
How do you see, one question is, how do you counsel or advise parents that are going to deal through this tragedy? How do you see them having to deal and process? What's your recommendations to them?
I think I fell back, I guess another when I was talking about my fabric and things that kind of make us who we are and in some ways set us up in a positive way for overcoming challenges or tragedies or even grief and loss in our life. One of the things was my education and my experience as a teacher. And one thing we do as teachers is we try to look for twofers and threefers. And what I mean by that is, like, if I'm going to teach you how to evacuate the classroom, or if I'm going to teach you, a simple skill of addition, I don't want you to use it in one context. I want you to be able to use it across a wide variety of potential situations and life experiences that you might run into. Like when we teach addition and subtraction in the classroom, my hope is that you're going to go use it in the grocery store and when you're shopping and balancing your checkbook and, making decisions in life for yourself and your family. But the same goes for safety, right? So, I want you to be able to use this skill of leaving, without me potentially, when the fire alarm goes off. I want you to know, and I want you to rehearse these movements, and I want you to be comfortable with them. I also want to experiment and do, let's shake it up a little bit. I want you to try to outside of the box. So what are some other ways you can get to safety? But what that's called is generalization. That's what we in education term as generalization. So you're using these skills. They're becoming part of you. It's tools in your tool belt, and you can now, use those elsewhere. But back to, processing grief and tragedy and loss and moving forward, I think I drew upon a lot of my prior life experiences. I never thought I would look fondly upon, other hardships that I had experienced in life, but it really did give me literally the strength, the muscles to start putting one foot in front of the other. But I learned a lot from other people's adversities as well. And it didn't have to be one that was very closely related to my own experience. I didn't just learn and gain strength from people who had experienced the very specific, tragedy that I had, the loss of a very young child, in a mass shooting in an elementary school. I mean, you can get really specific about your tragedy experience, or you can kind of step back and go, who has experienced something also unimaginable, something that none of us thinks we could ever possibly recover from? I want to talk to that person. I want to talk to the Holocaust survivors. I want to talk to the cancer survivors. I want to talk to, amputees. I want to talk to people who, who probably any of us would look at and go, I can't imagine. I don't think I would have been able to survive that. I want to talk to them because they have found a way, and they have something to offer, and I have something to offer. So that for me was very helpful. That's not the way it works for everybody. But I wanted to talk to people who had found it in themselves and others to carve a new path, one that they never expected they would be on. one that they never expected they would have to walk. But here they are, and they do. And that's something that really helped me a lot. And just knowing that I had my faith to fall back on, that I could ask really tough questions of God, and he could take it, and that he was gonna be there with me, not gonna solve all my problems here on this earth, but be there with me and help, bring good people into my life to help carry me along.
Michele, I read on a lot of, articles that they talk to you about reliving this moment every time there's a mass shooting. How do you shut that down? Do you have to turn the TV off? Like, how do you shut it, or do you seek more knowledge in that shooting, in that moment? How do you handle those moments where you
Yeah,
learn like everyone else?
it's interesting. I can't do it right away. My phone starts blowing up. Everyone starts, sending messages and are you okay? And all of that. And I'm like, I'm not right there right now.
Yeah.
I'm gonna wait until I'm gonna first get on my knees, and I'm gonna pray for the families and the community. And that's where I'm gonna be for quite a long time. And then when I'm ready, I'll start the learning. I'll start the learning and looking for ways that we can be of help. We're always going to be there for anyone who wants to reach out and try to gain support the way that I did from others.
Right.
We want to do that as well for other, but we don't show up uninvited. We don't self deploy. People there's a whole trajectory to the process, and I think a lot of people think, you know that immediately going and swarming a community and, offering your help is the way to go. But I would say not to. I would say, wait, let them
Let
receive.
them breathe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let them find their feet. It was kind of a shock to me to learn that, like, you don't start therapy right away, right? You have to wait a little while until you're literally out of that shock period before you can do anything, before you can make any big decisions. So it's
It's
different. It's different for everyone, for sure.
it's often been said by brothers of mine that were in combat that what they experienced, the trauma, the tragedy, whether it's loss of limbs or loss of brothers, and I can speak to this from my experience too. The battlefield in my brain was much worse than a battlefield in real life. And did you feel that?
Yeah, I would 100% say that. I think that probably, Steve, is why I was so insistent upon getting the facts, all of the facts, no matter how scary they were and how horrible they were, because they were horrible. They were unthinkable, but they were not nearly as horrible as the human mind has the power to imagine, and just, I found myself kind of on a loop early on of, like, all of the different horrible possibilities. So if I could just pin it down to one, then I was hurting my heart and my soul a lot less, and I was able to then deal with that very specific set of facts, rather than trying to deal with dozens and dozens. So facts, for me at least, were very important. Getting to the truth was really important to the healing process.
Did you feel that a take every thought captive until you had those thoughts kind of mentality, or you had the facts behind, because your mind does one thing and the facts tell a different story, right? So I've always processed, and I don't know if you can relate to this, is I'm going to take every thought captive, and I'm going to figure out, I'm not going to let you know the enemy take my mind over from this. And it could be something small in life, right? Or it could be a tragedy. But did you find that you were able to step back and get composure before you knew what your next mission was? Or was it after that you really became, I don't want to say hardened, because I don't think that's the right word, but prepared for the things you would hear in the future?
Let me think about that. I think definitely when those thoughts were creeping in, recognizing those and then identifying, okay, these are the things I need to find out. These are the questions I have. I'm going to go find the answers, being able to just be aware of that process and kind of like you were saying, not let my thoughts take control of me, not let my worries and my imaginings take control of me, but like grabbing a hold of them in that sense. And then determining that I was going to, run that down was helpful. In terms of being able to do something with the experience, it's a very strange thing, but before I even knew or understood what had fully transpired that day, I felt a very strong prompting that you have to do something. You have to step up. This is not okay. We can do better, and you are going to do this. So I just kind of knew that and accepted that. Um, but I also somehow was able to allow myself time to get to where I could be productive, because I don't think that people just spring right back up after they have experienced something like this. It takes you time to find your feet and to learn, and find a way that you can be of help, that you can be a contributor.
And
Wow.
you certainly have contributed. I want to get to a little bit, just being respectful of everyone's time. I do want to get to what you're doing with Safe and Sound Schools. Is there anything you'd like to tell everyone about,
So much.
conferences?
Yeah. So we're going to be, like I said, in your neck of the woods, probably mid-November. So look out for, if you don't subscribe to our little e-blast, please do. You can do that on our site. There's a little, subscribe or join us or something button like that on the website, to keep you abreast of all those things. So we'll have an in-person summit. Yay, in person. We're back in person.
Woo!
I know, it's so exciting. We have another one in Tennessee this summer. We have another Dallas one in September. We have our virtual. We celebrate School Safety Week every year with our virtual national summit. So that's thousands of geeks like us right here, that join and just kind of share knowledge and kind of catch up on the latest and greatest in terms of programs and interventions and education and training. So that will be mid-October, 17th, 18th, and 19th. So even if you can't get on a plane, you can absolutely get on your computer and join us that way. And then we just have a lot of really exciting programs. The kind of reinvigoration of our Safe and Sound Students program is on the horizon. We were talking about community engagement, right? Talking about using the amazing sensors and skills and eyes and ears of our students.
Yeah.
We have Parents for Safer Schools program as well that will be getting infused with some updates as well. We have our Especially Safe program, which is very much in Josephine's honor, about helping schools to better prepare and train even our youngest kids and our kids like Joey who have special needs to be safe and sound. And then we have some really exciting stuff coming literally in your neck of the woods, in the form of some partnerships with MSU. So I can't give anything else away just yet, but I promise that it's going to be awesome. And I think really, bring our national community together around what we can do to make sure everybody's safe and sound.
Amazing.
Just absolutely amazing. I'm looking forward to whatever we can do to support you guys. You guys are just a phenomenal. I mean, my heart goes out to you and your family, and goes without saying, should you guys need anything, our listeners, there's a host of people in this industry that listen to this podcast and are dedicated to school safety and keeping children safe on so many different levels. So please reach out to Michele, her team, and get involved. This is one cause that we will be involved in, and we would love to see our partners and our listeners involved as well.
Absolutely. And I'll include all of your information, of course, in the write-up. And thanks to all of you for listening to Time to Head North. You can find more episodes on our website, tngdefense.com. Thank you, Michele. Thank you, Steve, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.